Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing my March wrap-up. March was not a good reading month for me. I read, I think, 7 books total, and largely because with the uncertainty and the stress of the pandemic, it sort of just sapped my motivation. I ended up working from home the last 2 weeks of March, which also took quite an adjustment, but I did still get 7 books read, so let's get into them. The first book I read was Tacky the Penguin by Helen Lester, and this is a children's book that I don't own, but I will own at some point. I bought it as a baby shower gift for one of my coworkers, and they loved it. So I read it before I gave it to them because it's been a while since I reread the books. Tacky the Penguin is, like I said, a children's book about a penguin who doesn't quite fit in with the other penguins. It is hilarious and it's just great. It's a very short read, and if you are looking for something that's just weird and perfect, definitely check this book out. I gave it 5 out of 5. Then I read Salt to the Sea by Rudis Sepetis. I was looking for audiobooks that I didn't really have to pay a whole lot of attention to, just for some noise that wasn't music, when I started working from home, and this was the first one I read. I gave this one, well, let's see what I gave it. I gave this one a 2 out of 5 stars because it was very slow. I didn't connect to the characters, and it seemed like a journey book without any sort of actual journey. And also I didn't really like the writing style. To be fair, part of the writing style could have been the narrator for me. That's very possible. But as far as just the story, the plotline, the characters themselves, not my cup of tea. So I gave it 2 stars. And then the other audiobook that I finished in March was An Ember in the Ashes by Sabatir. I know I said I probably would never read them unless I got really bored, but surprise! Not that I got really bored, I have plenty of stuff to do, but I needed noise, and this is a YA fantasy that I didn't feel like I had to pay a whole lot of attention to because it's not one of the books that I have on a high priority list. This book is about Laia and Elias, who are from 2 different classes of people in this Roman Empire-based fantasy world. Elias is from the military academy, which is where they basically make people into these horrifying militaristic zombies, and Laia is from the slave population. A lot of oppression, it's not great. They come together and the world goes from there. This one I think I gave a 3.5 out of 5. I liked the premise. I liked, even the writing style was pretty good. The romance I could live without. There seemed to be a love triangle or a love geometric shape coming up in the first one, which has definitely popped up in the second one, and I'm really not liking it. I'm so over geometric shapes as far as love interests go. I didn't feel like it was necessary. I still don't feel like it's necessary, and that kind of just really took down the enjoyment level for me. I kind of connected with Laia, but it was just, there wasn't really anything there for me. It's a good book. I understand why people like it. I am continuing with the series because I've invested in it and the 4th one comes out soon. Yeah, that sounds right. So I'll be able to finish it pretty quickly, but it's definitely not one of my favorite books. Then we move into the books that I read physically. One of the first ones is my least favorite book of this month, this year actually, and that is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a book that was published in 1852 by a white Quaker woman. It is an abolitionist book with all of the racial slurs, which was acutely uncomfortable, let me tell you. I do have an entire review up on this one, so if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link down below. It follows Tom and Eliza predominantly, who are slaves. Tom gets sold down south, and Eliza escapes. I don't even care if there's spoilers, this thing is 150 years old, guys. So, follows them. It took me about 10 minutes, I think, to try and articulate my thoughts on this book, so go watch the review. But basically, I hated this book, and I didn't rate it because I couldn't, because I hated it. But then the rest of the books are pretty good. And actually, we're just gonna keep going with the racism. So the second one was The Lyncher in Me by Warren Reed. 100 years ago, in June, there was a lynching of 3 black men in Duluth, Minnesota. And there were 6 black men who were accused of raping a white teenage girl. She was 18, and she and her boyfriend, it turns out, had cooked up this entire thing just to... I don't even know why you would cook up an accusation like that, but they did. Anyway, so these 6 black men are arrested, and then this mob forms. I believe they said it was about 10,000 people. And they marched down to the jail that was in downtown Duluth, grabbed 3 of them, and lynched them. And then took a picture of it, like they were standing next to the Statue of Liberty or something, and that was also acutely uncomfortable. Lyncher in Me is a autobiography by the great-great-grandson, if I'm not mistaken, of one of the predominant men, Louis Dondino, who lynched those black men. Was it Jackson, McGee, and I can never remember the last man's name. But there is a memorial in Duluth now, Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial, on the corner of 2nd Avenue East and 1st Street. It is diagonally opposite the corner where the lynchings actually took place. But Louis Dondino was one of the men who was charged. He was charged with riot. There was no murder, no manslaughter, nothing that would indicate they actually killed 3 people. But he was charged with riot and then got out pretty quickly, I think, because that's what you do. But anyway, this is the autobiography of Warren Reed, who is the great whatever of that guy, and it's his story of finding out that one of his ancestors was involved in a lynching in Duluth, Minnesota, of all places, because in the States we all think of lynchings as something that happens in the South and probably not past the Mississippi River as far as east-west goes. But here it is, sort of by the Mississippi River, definitely still east of it, and just about as far north as you can go and still have a decent-sized town. And it boggles the mind, even though intellectually you know that lynchings happen all over at any time, any place, because that's the nature of racism. It's very pervasive. I gave this book, I think, a 2-star. It did talk about the lynchings, but it felt like he talked about really random stuff, like his gardening. I don't care about your gardening, sir. I'm sorry. And some of his metaphors were very stretched. They didn't quite connect for me. I really wanted him to talk more about the lynchings than about his own story today. He also, and I had a problem with this, he is a white man, and he compared his experience, or his potential experience, as a gay man in the 2000s as being comparable to the experience of a black man in the 1920s. And he did qualify it in that he knows it's, well, no he didn't. Yeah, he says, I've been among people who I'm sure would sooner see me dead than living with another man, and I know that there are times and places that I might be discovered hanging from a hastily fashioned noose or tied to a barbed wire fence, enveloped by men and women who see me not as a human being, but as a category, an aberration, an epithet. I know that as far removed as I am from the men beaten and lynched that night long ago, I am not so different. Yes, the LGBTQ+ community has experienced and continue to experience serious homophobia and horrifying events. As a white man, no, it's not comparable, and that bothered me a lot. Other than that, I did enjoy learning about the lynchings through the eyes of a descendant who had never heard about them before, but I think he focused too much on his own story and not enough on the lynchings, and then had just really weird writing style and metaphors. So I gave it 2 stars. And now let's just jump back into a topic that we all know that I love, and a book that was great. Elizabeth and Her Circle by Susan Doran. I finally read it. I also gave this book, I believe, a 5 out of 5, if not a 4 out of 5, probably a 4.5. because it was very dense. There was a lot of information to it, so it took me a little bit longer. But I loved this book. This book talked about her ladies in waiting, her maids in waiting as well. It talked about her family members and how she gave a lot of positions to her mother's clansmen because her mother had been beheaded and everything just went to shit after that, as opposed to her father's kinsmen. And it talks about, obviously, Mary Queen of Scots, kind of an important thing. It talks about Essex and how he pulled a really boneheaded move and lost his head for that. It talks about Cecil, it's amazing. It goes through the big people in her life, such as Dudley and Cecil and Walsingham, and what her relationship with them looked like, as far as personally and professionally, and all of that. It also, part of the reason I love this book so much now is that Susan Doran believes, as I do, that Elizabeth did not have any sort of sexual relationship with any of these men. She actually was a virgin when she died. Because she was not stupid and she didn't have time to actually have sex with any of these men. She was so busy with trying not to die and everything else that being a queen in that time entailed, that if she was never alone and didn't have time, there was no wiggle room for her to do it. So that was also very reassuring. Again, I know that that's still a debate because nobody can ever prove it, but I like it. So if you were looking for a good Elizabeth book that talks about some of the more high up members of her circle, I definitely recommend this book. I think it was great. There is so much information packed in this. Like I said, I give it a 4.5 because it is dense, but that was my only complaint. And then last but not least, I read The Grapes of Math by Alex Bellos. Loved this book. I think I gave this one a 5 out of 5 as well, maybe a 4. It's a really good book though. This one is about math, and I did a whole review on this as well, so I'll link that down below too. This book talks about math and how it's reflected in life. I will say, as I say in my review, if you don't have a solid, good basis in algebra, don't read this book because you will get nothing out of it. It does require a knowledge of algebra. There is a chapter on calculus. You can skip it. The chapters are pretty independent, but you need mathematical basis. So, that said, I loved this book. I have the mathematical basis to make it through and understand it. I thought it was fascinating and amazing. I recommended it to my dad, and he's loving it, which just makes me so happy. Yeah. Go check out the review if you're at all more curious about this because it was great. Like I said, March was an interesting month. Not a good reading month, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed, to get through more of my books in April. There will be more videos coming out talking about why April is such a big month, and you'll hear more about that later. But for now, those are the 7 books that I read in March. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.